Our future is urban. Every week, 3 million people move to cities around the world. By 2050, 2/3 of the world's population will live in cities. At BLOXHUB, we want to meet the urban challenge, creating better cities for all.
Those are all factors that are crying out for new ways of solving the challenges of the cities.
BLOXHUB is the innovation hub for future cities, founded on the belief that the challenges of global urbanization and climate change require new ways of collaboration between architecture, engineering, design thinking, construction, facility management and tech, but also between research and practice, and between startups and corporates, breaking down the silos, bringing together the brightest minds, co-creating better cities.
Talking about the BLOX building as a conception, an architectural design, we worked together with OMA, Dutch architectural company, founded by Rem Koolhaas, and they rapidly came up with this idea that because BLOX contains both an architecture center and a hub for urban development, it would actually be a strong concept to have people experience kind of the typologies, the living of people in cities within the building. So you could argue that the museum and the workplaces here would in themselves, and the building would in itself express urban living. So the idea of a city within a house or within the building rapidly became a core concept for OMA. And you could ask yourself, what does that mean? Well, it basically means that the typologies, the physical architectural typologies of a city that convert to what we do in our daily lives. So we work, we play, we have leisure, we have families, we live in an apartment, we go to culture, all that as functionalities, thereby typologies, is embedded into the design of the building. Once you walk into the building, you realize that this building is actually much more than just some workplaces and an architecture center. It actually kind of presents the full life of the city. So here you start out having a playground before you enter, and underneath the playground there is a kindergarten. And when you walk down underneath the traffic that runs into the city, you have access to the harbor front. So it's also an urban connector. And when you look up, you see kind of a sheer drop of 45 meters. That's like the tallest in the historical city center building we have. So the point is here that walking into the building, you will actually experience a lot of the typologies and the activities that takes place in a city. The way it's stacked, it consists of blocks, from which the name comes. These blocks expresses a kind of classical Copenhagen house, where you would have, for the first 2 stories, you would have shops and maybe even workshops. Then you would move further up and there would be offices, and on the top you would have the apartments. That's actually how it's done very specifically in blocks, and that's what you experience. So you enter a kind of small miniature city when you walk into BLOX. Having conceived the entire building as a kind of small city within a house, it's really about also making sure that that's something that people experience. And I think what you realize when you walk into this building is that there is a life going on that's much more complex that you would normally meet in a kind of simply stacked office building or a museum. It's really meeting people that you would not meet normally, because everything is mixed here. So this idea about people working, living, enjoying themselves, meeting cultural activities and so forth, all comes together here. And that is something that's quite unique for a building in Copenhagen, certainly, but also I would argue in other comparable offices or museum buildings around the world. So as OMA had conceived the building as a kind of small city within a big building, it became important that everybody felt welcome in the building, like thereby expressing that that's how we think of our cities here in Denmark, that they should be inclusive, they should really invite everyone despite religion, sexuality, culture, age, gender, whatever. They should feel welcome. So it became, on a very practical level, really important that we would have a high standard on making it easily accessible, even though being a complex building, like the city is a complex thing. So that became very important. So it's actually on the highest level of inclusivity when it comes to leaving no one behind on a more technical level, but also on another level, which is maybe about the fact that you feel welcomed by the way the spaces are laid out, that you feel invited into something that's kind of bigger than you would normally conceive an interior of a building. So for instance, you will have spaces that's like the size of the classical Copenhagen, really the size, the height and the volumes, just huge amounts of cubic meters. Expensive, but it plays an important role in having people to feel welcome. Also, the fact that there is a high level, a kind of unusual high level of transparency. I think I could argue that there are no museum and office buildings in the world that has that level of transparency. And you would see it if you visit us here in BLOX, that people working on solutions for the future urban development wherever in the world, sitting in the BLOXHUB, they can look directly into the big exhibition spaces and vice versa. The visitors, the guests in the Danish Architecture Center have access to seeing people work. And that's another way of kind of creating an understanding for different types of guests, visitors, workers, and what we do in the building. Talking about inclusivity and inviting people in, you could somehow argue that that's kind of the big why of this building, actually. Why was the building built? Why did someone, Realdania, a private association of philanthropy here in Denmark, why did they ever consider doing it? It's really about inviting people into a building that's kind of as large as life, about the life we live in the cities, and thereby inviting them in to really get to understand what is going on in the world when we're talking about urban environments, about cities, about sustainability, about climate change, about everything that really matters to all of us on the entire globe, and here in Scandinavia in particular, where we have a high focus on this. So the building is very much about inviting people in to participate not only in exhibitions but also in debates. So we have in the BLOXHUB, in the different organizations, including the Danish Architecture Center, we have debates where we mix and cross-pollinate insights from the broader public and the specialists, the architects, the designers, the planners, the engineers, all those who are providing solutions to all those who are demanding solutions. And we thought that this idea about making a cross-pollination between supply and demand, people meeting each other physically, talking about how should we develop this city, this world together. That's kind of the ethos of the building, because we believe that we cannot make a transition in the world, which we need to do, and we need to do it actually quite rapidly. We cannot do that without being as many as possible. It's not just the specialists, it's really the broader public that needs to say, I'm in on this. So they need to not only understand, but they also need to be empowered. So we invite you in to explore architecture, urban environment, and to participate in the development of the future environment. So inviting people in is kind of basically about an entire sector, a huge domain in society that says we know that we have an obligation, we have a responsibility. The entire building sector is like really putting a pressure on our CO2 emissions, to be very specific, but in general on the way we use the resources of our small planet. So we also therefore have the obligations to make sure that people feel compelled to be part of a larger movement. Because if people, and I hereby talking about everyone, all ages, genders, religion, cultures, whatnot, actually demand solutions that will take us to a better place in the future, and the future generations will kind of be grateful for what we do, then that would also put a pressure on the politicians. So we're also talking about creating a kind of political movement. That's not like really what color are you party-wise. It's really about how can we demand as a broader public solutions that make sure that we kind of save the planet, to put it simple, simplistic, I know, but to put it simple, say we want people to be in on that movement. And we feel that as an obligation, not as something that we kind of put down on people, but that we invite them in to be part of. So talking about creating a movement, the BLOX is actually kind of epicenter for one of the big programs of the EU, which is, it is a lighthouse for a new European Bauhaus project called Desire. So it's kind of the Nordic, the Danish way of trying really to contribute to a development in Europe to become a CO2 emission-free society, the entire Europe. What does that mean? Well, it means basically that we have to have the broader public, the citizens of all European countries, to buy in on a sustainable transition of the way we live, predominantly in our cities. And the point is that it's always the case when you want to move people, you have to speak to their feelings. And we think there's good reasons for that. There's a lot of climate anxiety. We'd rather use the aesthetic power of architecture and art, which has been around for thousands of years and has always been a core element in having people to buy in on the next movement of a society. So the point being here is that the artistic, aesthetic qualities of something as simple as renovating like 35 millions, energy renovation of 35 million apartments, housings in Europe, is something that's important. So the project, the New European Bauhaus project Desire, is about creating a desirability of moving into a next step of urban development, where the broader public actually demands new solutions from their politicians, from the businesses, from the sector, and they would only do that if they feel compelled, and they would only feel compelled if it appeals to their aesthetic senses, if they think it's beautiful. So something as old-fashioned as the concept of beauty is interesting. So we're actually trying to kind of compete with beauty to make something that just want people to have more of it. If BLOX somewhat is about building a better future, physically actually building a better future for all of us, for mankind, coming up with new solutions, it's obviously quite important that we look at the future. And the future, when we talk about mankind, is, as we all know, kids. So for that reason, children, school kids, families are specifically a segment of people that we cater for. We do it because they are the future. They are also the people who are going to develop the future society in, let's say, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years. So we want them as early as possible, pushing a little, but not being over didactic, pedagogical, but inviting the families and the kids in to get a bigger understanding of our physical environment, what it means to create good spaces, good public spaces, but also good living spaces, good workspaces, good institutions. That is a core purpose of creating educational programs, activities, debates, even with younger kids, school kids, to have them to buy in on the potential of architecture. Some of them might be an architect. It's really not the most important. The most important is the broader public's buy-in on the importance of great environments. Talking about kind of transitions and the developments of new ideas that's going on in specifically the building sector these years, it's really moving dramatically, rapidly, wild actually. So what we see is that we change a lot of building codes, thereby demanding other materials and a whole other idea about what should a building be. Now the BLOX building is designed more than 10 years back. It opened 5 years ago, and at that time OMA, together with the Arab engineering, together with the client, did the best to see how can we create as sustainable a building as possible. Today you would argue it will be done in another manner. There would be more wood, for instance, and less steel. But what we did in the BLOX building here was to insist on the proximity to the water, thereby cooling with the water from the harbor. Actually, it's the ocean. There are sun panels on the upper floors. We're connected to the district heating, which, by the way, 98.8% of all Copenhageners are, which is totally unusual, thereby making it possible to use that both for heating and cooling, which is also a kind of long time insurance on whenever we have new energy supplies, we can use the green energy supplies, which we do already. So right now, the energy in BLOX comes from windmills, predominantly. So we're doing our best to achieve the most, but obviously that's kind of the story of architecture. It builds epochs in stone, steel, and in the future much more in wood. So things are changing, and we are on that track to change. Having a birthday party is kind of always, an occasion to celebrate, but also to consider what have you achieved. Now 5 years is not a lot. We are in our infancy, but certainly what we realize by the help of Realdania and the Danish state and the municipality of Copenhagen is that we have created an unusual kind of platform for merging the interest of the broader public with the capacity of the entire sector. And that platform, which was not here before, and which maybe is not really anywhere else in the world, so specifically done into a building that is kind of the city in a house, in a building, that is something that's unusual and that kind of carries a lot of results with it. So one of them being that we have had thousands of people from the entire world visiting Copenhagen, visiting BLOX, meeting up with all the Danish, Nordic professionals, but also now being on the level of 250, 300,000 laymen, ordinary people, visiting an architecture center, which is quite a lot for an architecture center. So the point is here that we think that that kind of synergy between the broader public, the politicians thereby, and the sector is one of the core tools to create a better future, which we hopefully will contribute to for the next decades. When you consider the role of architecture centers, architecture museums in the world, I think you could argue, without being too self-orientated, that the architecture center plays another role than classical museum, because the architecture centers are so connected to the daily life of all of us. So what does that mean? It means that we have a specific role on trying to move the broader public the way that the broader public have themselves democratically decided. So a lot of people are talking about, where does your architect stand in a certain dispute about a specific building? We're not really interested in that. We're on the side of the broader people. That might sound easy to say, but it's actually quite hard work to do. The point being that what we want to be part of is to contribute to a broader public movement on owning the future for our kids, the future generations, meaning a responsibility for the future with the focus on the built environment. So what we're working on here is really to reach out, invite in, empower people through exploring architecture out in the city, in exhibitions, in debates, as kids in particular, but also adults, professionals, whoever, really to mobilize a broader movement that demands the right solutions, which we do not know exactly what is for the future, but being part of working on it is such a joy as a center. And what we experience here is actually also people coming from abroad, that they're actually mesmerized about that kind of generosity from a society to invite people to be part of the debate. So that's what we are working on, and hopefully we will create a movement of sustainable architecture.
We believe in curiosity. We believe in knowledge. We believe in co-creation. Our urban future, co-created.